Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Elder Empire C Book 3 of Kings and Killers, chapters 11, 12, and 13. In these chapters, well, there is some... Every time I am in Jyrene's head longer, I just get so much more angry at her, guys. I really did feel some sympathy. I felt like I got, and just, it's gone now. It's gone. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Asher for commissioning this episode. Asher is over here in the chat. So these chapters, first of all, I was really glad that I got to do 3 because it really, I just needed to know more. We start off 3 years ago again, and it's after they have experienced that explosion because Jyrene used her soulbound weapon to incinerate the captain, who was very indiscreet about what he planned to do and seemed to think that he had fooled her into believing that he didn't intend anything. Not a smart man. Anyway, we're in Calder's head for this, and he is extremely frustrated with this guy because, first of all, the fact that he is dead, and of course, we know it's not this dude's fault, but it seems to them like he made some kind of mistake while he was loading the munitions, which are, apparently very dangerous, but they didn't explode the way they should have. Calder thinks it was that man's fault. So he's assigning him all the blame for the fact that now the Reliable, which is the ship that man was soulbound to, should have been an option for them. But if he is no longer around, it's not going to work. And it says, and the munitions were gone, which he had planned to use to clear the way to the beach. Now he was reliant on Foster and Urziah to make a path for the rest of them. Goss and Lakiri were all but dead weight now. They had been closer to the explosion than anyone else, and their hearing had still not returned. Goss was covered in burns, though they were all shallow. He would be fine, but he wouldn't be much help in their escape. Which meant that Urziah, Andal, and Calder, with Foster's support, had to carry 3 passengers incapable of combat through a jungle filled with elder spawn. So, Calder has to basically be like, all right, guys, it's a bad scene. We had a plan that probably would have been risky enough, but now we don't even have that. And we are going to maybe not have enough food, and we just have to deal with that and not take anything with us because otherwise we'll be too weighed down. And I do like that when he makes this joke about it's better to lack food than to be food. He had expected a tense laugh or maybe a look of agreement, but he got one only from Andal. At least he and the quartermaster had been singing the same tune recently. I desperately want Andal's POV right now. I keep wondering. He saw Jyrene. And when I say saw, I mean in the last book he had that moment where he walked in on what he thinks looks like an elder ritual. I definitely could have taken her expression multiple ways, which I said in the recording. She goes from looking irritated to overjoyed. And while I totally get what Andal was thinking, and I'm not even entirely sure he was wrong, I could have also read it a different way, as her genuinely being glad that everybody is safe, especially Calder, because she's grown to actually care about him. But that aside, We have seen from Jyrene's own perspective how often she will purposely put on an act and how good and convincing she is at it. So Andel's interpretation of her expression isn't something I'm just going to dismiss. It's simply something that I feel like could be true and could also believably not quite be true. However, I really was giving Jyrene a lot of grace when I gave that alternate interpretation. And after this section, I don't really know exactly what it was that sort of pushed me over the edge, but I'm not really willing to give her that same benefit of the doubt anymore. We'll get to the part that sort of made me go, all right, that's enough. But anyway, I would really love to know what's going on in Andel's mind, because he has been suspicious of her for a minute. We know from conversations that we saw in earlier books that he had tried to say something about this to Calder, who just did not want to hear it. And I really wonder if he has any suspicions as to what happened other than the story that's being circulated, which is that it was an accident. He doesn't say anything, but again, I think that he has known for a bit that there is no way to bring anything up without ironclad proof, because Calder's not going to listen. So, let's see, I'm trying to find this, but here it is. The cook tucked the heavy safe containing the crown under one arm. Calder would prefer to have someone else carry it, but it would have taken anyone else 2 hands, and they couldn't afford that. Taking their champion down one arm was better than burdening someone who could barely run. Besides, Urziah had insisted. So they head out, and immediately they are being beset upon. There are so many of these things. Let's see, I'm trying to find the exact moment. Calder caught a glimpse of green bulk descending from the treetops. It landed on Urziah before he could get a good look at it. Get to the beach, Calder shouted. At that moment, the bushes came alive. The slithers crawled out from everywhere. Everywhere. Every patch of grass and gnarled nest of roots and loose patch of bark disgorged a hideous lime-green creature with 6 yellow eyes and a dozen webbed amphibian feet. Scarlet stingers flexed, and the elder spawn lived up to their name as they slithered for Calder and his crew. So this shit it gets pretty wild pretty quickly. Andal separated from the group, dashing for the safe that Urziah had dropped. He'd probably made the best call in regard to their objective, because the crown's return would benefit the Empire even if they all died here. But as far as personal safety went, Calder applauded everyone else instead. So they get in a circle with their backs to each other, and they're, doing their best to hold these things back. He winds up getting bit pretty quickly. Lakiri also gets bit, and eventually gets stung. The biting doesn't seem to be the thing that's really super dangerous. It's the stinging that's gonna kill you. So the Urziah is flipping around and fighting and all of this. And then the Luminian held the safe behind him as Othagor's amphibian behemoth stood over him. Without thinking, Calder broke formation, dashing for Andal. He shouted, trying to draw the creature's attention. And then somebody screams, and he turns around, and he sees Jyrene. And she calls his name. And it says that settled it. Calder ran for her. Just in time to see Andal swallowed by the frog. I really want to know if Andal saw this moment. Because later on, Jyrene can't help but think to herself that things might have actually been easier for her if Andal were really dead. And Andal, having been so suspicious of her, I have to assume that he kind of knows she is... I have to assume Jyrene has been aware of his suspicions, and that's why she thinks it'd be easier without him, and that Andal is aware that she is aware, right? So, we know inside Jyrene's head, she did not do this explicitly to get Calder distracted from Andal. However, will Andal think she did if he saw exactly how this went down? It's unclear to me exactly, like, how much of this he specifically witnessed and how much of it he was distracted by what's already going on with him to begin with. But if I were Andal, I think I would interpret this as her trying to get me killed. I just probably would. So it eats him. Jerry screamed. Calder whipped back to her, searching for danger, but the slithers were gone. So, of course, she's screaming because of what just happened to Andal. Meanwhile, Lakiri has been twitching and foaming at the mouth, and she is clearly on her way out. And this poor kid that was involved with her is just like on his knees next to her and crying. And I just honestly felt really bad for him. The scene that happens later with Jyrene, he's like at his wit's end here. And even though the Sleepless clearly suck, and I'm not defending them, there is a part of me with this that was just like, oh, babe, I'm so sorry. So we cut from there to chapter 12. And it opens with what looks like it's going to be an excerpt from something, but turns out to be a note from the governess of Dilia, Natalia Corwin, to Calder. And essentially she's like, am I supposed to listen to you or the imperial steward or my imperial regent? Until the answer is clear, I can't justify the expense to reinforce the tomb of Cathanikar. Perhaps if you could persuade the Black Watch to focus on their duties instead of acting like militia, we would not need to fear for the security of our elders. And Calder is just getting really frustrated. He is pretty certain that a lot of the messengers have been being killed, but he's also taking it as a given that the one messenger who succeeded in handing it over to a representative, that those representatives handed it on and that message was received. So everything that Calder finds out about the activity of the gardeners, mostly, he is interpreting through the lens of, they got my message and this is what they're choosing to do with the information that I gave them. Which, as we know, they never got that information. So I am a little bit admiring of the fact that despite his frustration, Calder keeps being like, but we have to set this aside. I am so tempted to just like try and lash out at them because I'm frustrated and pissed. But none of these things actually matter, and I really have to keep that in mind. He is trying to stay focused, and I do really respect that. So, it again assumes that everybody is ignoring him, and he is addressing the only two remaining champions. There's 3 remaining, but only 2 have come to his summons. The other one that apparently escaped was 12. And she's the one that gardener like came up to talk to her and then found out she was just leaving and had no intention to be involved. And the gardener walked off and let her. That was 12, who was the one that got in the fight with Kern, and Kern basically completely flattened. So that was kind of fun to find out after the fact, because I didn't know that. You know, we didn't see that confrontation in Shara's book. So Calder is, first of all, not using the throne. He is like using I'm trying to find the exact description of it. He was dressed in the emperor's old clothes, layers of red and orange and gold, with the silver steward's crown on his head. He didn't need to wrestle against the authority of the Emperor's intent today, and if he had to compel his next visitors to do anything, he'd already lost. So Calder tells them the Independents have ignored our messages. They're not interested in talking. His throne was a small plain seat of polished wood at the base of the stairs leading up to the Emperor's throne. At this point in his career, he had decided it would demonstrate too much ego to take visitors while sitting on the Emperor's ancient seat. I have to agree, probably it wouldn't be a good look. I also think that based on the intent in his crown, that the intent in the throne is, insane. And just overall, I kind of do wish that he had made it more high impact, like a very simple wooden seat. I'm like, can't we have something a little bit more? But it's fine. So first we meet Rosaphus, who has apparently got weapons strapped all over his body. And even though Calder is aware, this man is a champion, and he is a professional, and he is extremely dangerous, he looks like a fucking moron. And all I could think of here was, there was an illustrator that Owen has often talked to me about, of comic books in the 90s, who just gave all characters 1,000,000 pockets. They were always drawn as like hyper-muscled, just hulking strong men. And they had outfits with so many pockets all over them that it was just kind of baffling. Like, what? That just, it doesn't look good, sir. And this is what I keep thinking of with this guy. His breastplate was a bunch of swords strapped strategically to his chest. The one practical aspect of the costume was that Calder had no clue which of the many exotic and strangely positioned weapons was the man's soul-bound vessel. And then there's Tyria. And she hasn't brought any weapons. She's just chilling in like an outfit that says it could have been stolen from a milkmaid. I'm assuming that this means she's in like a corset and dress, but that I find hard to believe from a champion, but maybe she is. And she is eating some snacks that she brought for, like, probably from a street vendor right outside, and is very unimpressed with all the proceedings here. She's 100% on board, as it turns out, for what Calder is suggesting. But while the whole like atmosphere he was expecting, once we find out that all these other champions have been murdered, which Calder doesn't know yet. Once we find out, Calder's kind of like, I would expect both of you to be champing at the bit for revenge. And Rosaphus is. But Tyria doesn't seem bothered in any sense. And he's just kind of mystified by that. And it did sort of also give me pause and make me go like, does she just not, is she not as committed as she is pretending to be, or what? It doesn't seem like it. I feel like I believe what she's saying, but her cavalier attitude is a little bit puzzling. So yeah, when he says something about how it's just the two of you, he's clearly feeling away because he thinks he's just being ignored by the rest of the champions. But then Rosaphus tells him they're dead. And Calder's like, how did you find out? They found Trip dead in his bed this morning. Had to be poison, and it takes some real poison to kill one of us without waking us up. Calder is like, all right, well, the alchemist said it was heart failure, which I've heard can happen with y'all, because champions, they've been fucked with a lot. They're meant to be very strong. They're not meant to live a long time. Would have thought so myself, if not for the others. Oleana was stabbed to death in a bar fight down by the docks. Normal guy with a normal knife couldn't stab her to death if you gave him all night. The blade would break before she did. And then there's Interion. Rode out to Hightower yesterday, taught the Luminians a lesson, and then disappeared on the way back. Calder had heard about the lesson the champion Interion had inflicted on Luminian headquarters. Most of the order was in Rainworth, so they had left only a skeleton crew manning their fortress. Jyrene had unleashed the wrath of a champion on a few washouts, old-timers, and servants. Calder had already drafted up an order to have him executed for it after the fighting was over. I don't remember this guy specifically. I remember, there were a bunch of deaths that we get right in a row, but this guy and what he did to the Luminians specifically, I don't remember, and I'm not sure if we were shown it. I assume we were, but I kind of want to go back and reread it just out of curiosity. And Calder's like, well, maybe he just went a different way. And Tyrion's like, he said he'd be back at Hightower and he didn't show. He's dead. And Rosfus then says, they would have gotten me too if it weren't for my battle instinct. And Tyrion's like, yeah, no. He had to pee. And he just stepped out at a time where they weren't expecting him. And he saw someone running away and a bomb just literally laying there. And Rosifus tries to be like, I knew something was wrong. And she's like, but the bomber got away, huh? And he's just so mad as she just basically lifts the bag to get the crumbs out of the bottom. I couldn't get enough of this woman. She was cracking me up. I really enjoy her. So again, this is Calder being like, so this is how they respond to my message. And I'm like, no, but I get why you think that. And he asks, what do you think the Gardeners are going to do next? And Tyria says they're softening you up. Next, they'll go for the kill. And Calder's like, ugh, that sucks. I thought that too. And I didn't want to believe that I was right, but you're a fucking champion. So if you think that, it's probably what's happening. And he says, you guys know I'm going to be doing this speech thing tonight. I'm going to be bait. Are you guys prepared to back me up? And Tyrion's like, why do you think we're here, dude? Good. This might be my last act as steward. I want to make it a good one. So let's see. Ideally, we'd all like to go out like Kern, on our feet with swords wet. We still might. There was every possibility he would be dead by dawn tomorrow if anything went wrong, and if everything went perfectly, well, he might still end up dead. That was what usually happened to the bait. And I'm like, he does end up dead. He doesn't stay that way, but he does end up dead. I'm so sorry, Calder. Doesn't seem like that was great for you. So let's see. I'm going to find this. Okay. Calder had his guard lead him into the bowels of the Imperial Palace. Their destination was the heart of the palace, next to the Emperor's quarters and his private armory, but the guards wouldn't tell him exactly what it was. It's a secret, they'd said. We're not even supposed to say it out loud. And this is where he meets his body double, who is in what Calder describes as a costume gallery. 200 or 300 wooden mannequins populating the tiered rows that covered the back half of the building. Some wore wigs and thin rubbery masks, while others had fake facial hair pinned to boards nearby. All were dressed in pristine costumes from all over the world. And this just made me think of the Masons. And I don't know if they got this idea from, because it doesn't feel like this is new. This feels like the whole production, I don't know what else to call it, has been here, but it feels like they're definitely borrowing from one another. And this dude pops out who Calder is just like, holy shit, because he looks a lot like him and he's even imitating Calder's voice, and his name is Roderick, which is Calder's dad's name. And Calder has a moment of oh, my dad was away from my mom for quite a while, and he basically asks this guy, were you named for your father? And the guy's like, no, I mean, my dad is a fisherman. I know who he is. And I appreciate you thinking that I might be your brother, because that's just a real big compliment to my skills and everything, but I'm not. And a part of me was like, maybe you're not. But you think you know who your father is. The only one who really knows who your father is your mama. So I'm just saying. But he insists that it was soul-bound magic. Roderick gestured to one side where an ornate portrait of an ancient woman hung on one wall. Behind her, where another woman's family might have gathered around her for a family portrait, were 6 mannequins. She crafted disguises, died a few years ago, may her soul fly free, but her works remain as potent as ever. She hadn't crafted one for you, of course, but she left a few materials behind that we could cobble into shape. They're invested to make me look as much like the subject as possible, and of course there's some alchemy and some rather fine acting involved. So, I really, I'm getting ahead of myself here. Calder walks around and lights the candles, which one of the guards feels a little bit away at the fact that Calder's doing this himself and not asking for help. I don't know if there's any significance to the fact that Calder walks around and lights them himself. We know that he occasionally just prefers to do things on his own, but there's something about the fact that we don't hear his thoughts on this that made me wonder. And then he talks about the security measures, and this guy is going to be the one actually giving the speech, using the script Calder has prepared. Calder says, "My 2 remaining champions will be with him as well to add authenticity. If anything happens to me, they'll still be close enough to respond." And they're saying, yeah, and you'll be in a waiting room we've secured inside the stage building, wearing the Emperor's armor. After the address is over, you will visit the double and switch places, after which you will be greeted. You will greet selected citizens personally, once they have passed through our security screening. So Calder is like, sounds great, flawless. However, I have gotten some info about the consultants, and I think they are going to come after me right away. If they act tonight, I don't want them to get away. I want to find a way to seal them in the building. Is there something we can do? And it turns out there's a padlock that can seal the exits to an entire building in an instant. And it was General Teach's, and they need Calder's authorization to use it. And Calder is like, sweet, that is literally exactly what I am looking for, which we do see the results of that in Shara's chapters. So Calder says, we have to minimize the chance of a leak. After we leave, tell me its location and I will retrieve it myself. Tell no one. And then asks for some privacy. So his guards leave. He sits down across from Roderick, and Roderick starts to be like, if you're worried about security, it's no problem. You can keep a guard or 2 here. And Calder stops him and lifts up a paper on which he has written, could be listening. I will give the speech. The double's eyes widened as he realized where Calder was going. This will be risky for you. Are you willing? I love this. I love this because when we were in Shara's chapters and she was watching Calder give the speech and she was saying it was a very good double, but she could detect slight differences. I think I said, what if she's wrong and that is Calder? Like, what if you think they're using a double and you're fully expecting that, so they just actually put Calder out there. And I sort of got myself psyched out with all of my suspicions. That's the way it happens a lot. If you start being too paranoid about everything, you begin to go in circles. So I kind of cut myself off from that line of thought, but I am delighted to find out that's essentially what was going on here. And when he asks Roderick if he'll be willing to do this, Calder is fully anticipating that maybe the guy won't agree because he isn't doing this out of his loyalty to the Empire. He's just kind of brave and willing to take this risk. And Calder's just banking on, hopefully, that this guy will be brave enough to do this other thing, even though he knows it will be risky. And he straightens and gives him a single nod, and Calder reaches out and shakes his hand. He looked up at the Emperor's duplicate armor standing on the pedestal over their heads, then added more to the note. Now, help me get this down. So what I found sort of interesting is, first of all, I feel bad for Roderick because he takes this risk. He knows the risk, but, you know, it's one thing to know it, and it's another thing for it to, like, be a certainty. And I do feel bad for this guy because I guess he just died, and that sucks. On the other hand, I always think about whenever somebody's thinking, maybe somebody's listening, maybe there's a bug. Oftentimes the way that people handle it in fiction, to me, would make the person who's listening really suspicious. Like, Calder wants this guy to come in so that they can allegedly talk about security, but then 5 minutes pass with no speaking at all. And if anybody is listening, wouldn't they kind of be like, what's going on? But I guess, you know, you can only do so much. So then we go to Bliss and we find out more about her situation. And it turns out Bliss she's kind of like 11 from Stranger Things, actually. She remembered her birth, emerging from an alchemical bath in a body that she now recognized would be normal for a 3 or 4-year-old child. She had looked up and seen Nathaniel Boreas's glasses gleaming in the light. There had been a whole team of alchemists in the room that day, and the memory was so distant that she wasn't sure she took any particular notice of Boreas. But in her dreams, he was the only one she remembered. Likewise, she didn't remember his actual words, but she imagined him saying, if she fails the tests, put her in the incinerator like the others. She knew that in reality, he had probably said nothing of the sort. He wouldn't have needed to. Everyone in that room knew the procedure. So they keep her in this pink room for years. And she is tutored by people who get changed in and out, which I have to assume is done explicitly so that she doesn't like grow particularly attached to anybody and that they don't grow attached to her. And Boreas himself. He said he was her father, and a father was someone who should always be obeyed. Third were the elder spawn of Tharlos. Her first few dozen encounters with them had been just like any other child's. She had screamed and panicked and tried to escape. Spawn of Tharlos were shapeshifters who held no form for long, bizarre, ever-melting blends of animals and objects. But she found you could grow used to anything over time. Once she had learned to tolerate the elder spawn, she had been given a length of yellowed bone. This time, she really did remember what Nathaniel Boreas had said to her. No one has ever managed to beat this before, but you will, won't you? You're such a good girl. She had wanted so badly to pass the test. And this kills me. We don't know what tests she underwent. And her remembering coming out of the alchemical bath, we don't know what she was when she went into this bath. Was she a regular human child that underwent a bunch of changes like a champion? Was she something else that got like turned into something that looks like a human child? Was she created through alchemy, whole cloth? Like, she doesn't seem to know. I don't know. But obviously, they've been doing this a while, and most people didn't make it too far. So she manages to eventually get control over the spear and defend herself with it. And the soul binding is complete the day, the spear's intent had become clearer and clearer to her until one day its logic just made sense to her. It wanted things to change. Anything and everything, all the time. That day, she had changed her location for the first time, and she saw the facility where she had been trapped, the prison. She saw the outside, and saw what had happened to the others before her. And now her nightmares showed her the label outside her cell. Her name, number 4162B. And I really wonder how she saw what had happened to the others before her. Changing her location and taking her outside is one thing so that she can tell that there's a big, great world out there and she's not being allowed in it. But seeing what had happened to the others before her, she must have traveled around in the facility, I would imagine, quite a bit, which I don't think was probably what they intended for her to do. But I do find it amusing, the idea that they are like trying to get her to use these powers without fully considering what she might use them for. So it says it had taken much longer for her to break the hold that Nathaniel Barrios had over her, and she still sometimes woke shaking at the memories. It kept her anger hot. So she's waking up here, and she pats this spear to sort of like calm herself, and is thinking about how revenge was too difficult to achieve on the richest man in the world, and she had a greater purpose now anyway. So we've known that she has no respect for Nathaniel Barrios, that she does not like when people call him her father, that she's just, obviously has no interest in like a relationship with this man. But having given up on revenge is like kind of next level. Revenge is still you deciding that you are going to devote a lot of time and energy to a person, even if it's their destruction. They are taking up a ton of your focus. If you move past that, they simply don't have that focus for you anymore, which I think is much healthier, but of course, very difficult to achieve. I understand completely how you would just get fixated on revenge, and that's as far as you would go. I probably would too, But she's thinking about how could she put her personal desire over protecting people from the great elders. And all of a sudden, Nathaniel Barrios says, "You can't, of course. I would never ask you to." He's right there, and she impales him. He spurted blood and fell, but a second Barrios stepped out of her closet. And he compliments her on her name, which he says he's proud of. And Bliss is like, "That is my name." And she swipes her spear at him, and he jumps back into a swirling portal in the void. Bliss felt a surge of triumph. He was in league with the elder cultists. She'd known it all along. Well, she hadn't known it, but that made a great excuse to kill him. So she jumps after him through the portal, and she changes the location. Like, she follows him, but she doesn't like go through it. She just changes her own location to follow him, if that makes sense. And she continues doing this before she starts to realize that her focus on her vessel isn't quite as strong as it had been. And she realizes that something has been affecting her perception of everything. Immediately begins to change her blood in a very specific way, cleansing it. So she's getting rid of whatever it was that's been fucking with her, the poison. And finally is able to see around her clearly. The 15 laughing Barrioses surrounding her. Now that her mind was unclouded by alchemy, she could feel the foreign intent in the illusion. "I imagine he is paying you a lot of money, but is that really worth me learning who you are? I will not punish you if you tell me where I am." And they all vanish at the same time. And she says rude, which I do really enjoy. But she's starting to understand that somebody has been trying to distract her and lure her away. And she's thinking that Barrios never actually tries to harm her. Because even Barrios knew he needed the head of the Black Watch and that she would be almost impossible to replace. He usually just stayed away from her, which was a good decision for several reasons. If he had tried to administer a lethal poison, the Spear of Tharlos would likely have neutralized it immediately. It needed her alive. Barrios had known that, but he had still gambled quite a bit to be rid of her. It must be important. And she realizes, oh, they're probably making a move right now. I need to get back to the capital. And then we go to chapter 13, back to 3 years ago. Jerry is crying, and Calder is just like shaken up at the fact that Andal has been eaten. Lakiri is really, it's very clear she is not going to make it. And Calder is like, I genuinely don't know what to do. There's only really one option. And he kicks off his boots as he gets to the beach and wades into the surf. He waved his sword in the air, drawing Foster's attention. And he's wading in and genuinely really terrified. He can't see the monsters that are in the surf, but he knows they're there. And let's see. After only a moment of busying himself on the ropes, Foster and Petal freed the sail, which instantly filled with wind. Calder stopped with the water up to his ribs. Even if he managed to swim with his sword and jacket, there was no way he could gather up the courage to try it. At least with his feet in the sand, he had some kind of defense. Yes. Thank you. Please do not be like treading water, sir. And you have a sword in your hand. You are not going to be able to tread water and hold a sword for any prolonged, like takes a crazy amount of strength. Just don't try it, sir. So he contacts the Leviathan, which is really, really disgusted at having to be in contact with the sand. If this state persists, it intends to pull the ship out to the comfort of the sea, even if it leaves the human that holds its contract behind. And Calder's like, fuck. And he sends a message, defend me, to which the creature replies with a sense more than words of just, defend yourself. With that statement, the Leviathan sent its perspective on Calder's situation. And Calder was glad he was standing so deep in the water because he immediately lost control of his bladder. One of those worm creatures had encircled him. Poor Calder. Honestly, if you're going to pee your pants in fear, being waist deep in water already is pretty much best case scenario. So I guess that's not so bad. And he is like, I am not going to be able to get this thing. I can't even really see it. I have this fucking sword, but there's water in the way. Like, what am I? And then all of a sudden, its head explodes because Foster has been keeping track of the situation and just fucking like salutes him. Bless him. Fucking Foster. Coming through. So he makes a deal with the Leviathan. If you save me now, I owe you a favor. Food. Calder received the image of full-grown sharks. You will feed me. I accept. It feels too easy. I don't know, guys. There's something about this that makes me really worried. I don't know. The Leviathan sent its agreement, and Calder scrambled for the shore, scraping gore away from his eyes as he marched. The testament was close now, so it would soon run aground, but as long as the hull didn't fracture, that was a problem the Leviathan could handle. And then we go to Urzaya's POV, and I love this so much. Anytime that we're in Urzaya's POV, it's just kind of delightful. So first it starts with him just kind of thinking, lots of people have tried to kill me. And I haven't even really been angry about that, usually. Because mostly when they attempted to kill me or to betray me, they had reasons for doing it that I understand. And I'm not like going to really hold against them because they were just trying to accomplish something. But elders just want to do shit because they suck. They are bad. And they never really have real reason behind any of their actions except to like make things worse for everyone else. And there's something about his attitude with all this that I just really understand. And it's not like, I'm not trying to say if somebody were trying to kill me that I wouldn't take that shit personally and be angry. But I've said before how if I were to be killed as a sort of side effect of something rather than a person actually trying to take me out because of a purpose, it would be so much more insulting and frustrating because at least if they're doing it because you specifically need to be taken out of the way, I can understand it. I don't want to die, but it would give me some kind of weird comfort to feel like there's a reason for it versus them just doing it because they enjoy killing people or because, again, like a side effect of the fucking weapons that collide on the Grey Island that kill like 20 people. No, I don't want that, you know? So anyway, he says, or he's thinking, it was easy to hate elders, especially when one ate your friend. So he has been following it, and he did manage to smash it at one point. Does not slow it down, and Urzaya's kind of like, God damn it. Of course it didn't, these fucking things. When the frog behemoth, is that how you say that? I don't feel like I've ever... Behemoth? Jumped to a new tree, he called on the power of his soul-bound vessel. The predatory fury of the sand-born hydra filled him, and he could feel himself growing heavier. And I had forgotten that this was part of what he can control is his weight, which is dope. The hydra's power wasn't as simple as merely changing his weight. He couldn't explain exactly what the difference was, but he knew he grew tougher even as he grew heavier. And I'm assuming that's his density? Like his whole body somehow? But I don't know. Once, when he had pushed his vessel to the limit, he had managed to catch a cannonball. That had been a good day. So, now, it turns out, with great concentration, he can affect the weight of other things. Which is wild. And seems really unfair. And he takes away the weight of the tree that this creature is in so that he can just rip it out of the ground. And the fucking thing just squawks and falls out because he like slams it on the ground. So all of these slithers appear because they hear this thing like screeching in distress. And I love this moment too. He doubted such small creatures could break his skin. Even if they did, his champion augmentation meant that most poisons did less to him than a mug of beer. If their venom could get through his skin and his bloodstream, then the slithers had earned their kill. I love that. He's just like, look, I really don't think it's going to be an issue. But if it is an issue and I die, that's kind of deserved. I don't want to die, but at least it'll feel like they really deserved to kill me. And I can live with that. I don't know. There's something about it that I really understand. So Urzaya stands over this thing and it croaks and its mouth opens and it basically vomits up Andal and the safe, and Andal is fine. He blinked at the gunk covering his eyes, trying to see, but fainted instead. Urzaya's relief hit him all at once, and he staggered to a seat on the collapsed tree. He had allowed himself to hope for Andal's survival, but deep down he had given up on his friend's life. It was a new ray of hope, and it brought back his smile. And this frog monster is gesturing to the chest with a crown in it, and is like clearly going, "Can you just take that and leave me alone?" And Urzaya basically like reaches out and rubs his head like, "Oh, little guy." And he just lets it go. He didn't like elders. But bargaining for his life was a very human thing to do. He could let this one go. After all, it hadn't really killed his friend. Urzaya, what a gift he is, and what a loss that he's dead. It's so sad. Ugh. It just makes me so sad. I loved him. So then we go to the testament. Everybody's on board again. Foster's just getting caught up. And finally they open the box and they look at the crown. And Calder has a moment of just like, that's kind of disappointing. It's not like bejeweled. It's not intricately designed. It's just gold circlet. That's it. And Calder's kind of like, well, what can you do? And then he touches it and he gets reader burn and his nose is bleeding. And he's just like, holy shit. Everybody's like, are you okay, dude? And he's like, yeah, that is definitely the Emperor's crown. Holy shit. And then we go to Jerry's POV. And she's at Andal's side. She was as exhausted as anyone else, and her wounds ached. She had been forced to allow the slithers close to her in order to keep her cover, and the mindless spawn of Othagor couldn't tell the difference between friend and foe. She needed sleep, but she couldn't bring herself to leave Andal. When she had called for Calder's help, she had only meant to show her vulnerability to him and to establish once again she couldn't possibly be a soulbound. No soulbound would have allowed herself in that position. She hadn't intended him to be distracted from Andal, but when the elder had swallowed the quartermaster whole, her first thought hadn't been concern for his well-being. She had felt relieved that the one person who might stand in her way was gone. And she has mixed feelings about him being okay and coming back. That realization sickened her. The rest of the world thought of the Sleepless as evil, and she accepted that view because she understood it, but she knew they weren't evil. They simply fought for progress. It would be worth it, she whispered, patting Andal's hand. So she's still kind of here, maintaining a little bit of my sympathy, because she sees how gross this is and is judging herself for feeling some mixed feelings about the fact that this guy is still alive. She blew things up because she was trying to keep everybody from being murdered by the fucking Sleepless agents that they did not know they were surrounded by. All of that, I can understand. I don't like it. I understand. But then we have Goss, who comes up to her. And this dude is not doing okay. So he first is like, I saw you talking to him last night. And she tries to be like, oh yeah, it's so lucky that I didn't get hurt. And then he holds out this key of blackened bone. And she freezes and he's like, yeah, I can call the Cabal and you're going to answer to them. So bring me the crown. Jerry understood the plan as Goss must see it. First of all, he really was crazed and feverish. In his irrational state, he had become fixed on his mission. Maybe he thought if he completed it, the death of his friends would be worthwhile. Maybe he thought the Cabal could bring the rest of his crew back to life. He saw that he had a lever over Jerry, and that was the one lever he could pull to get him closer to the crown. She doubted he'd thought about what to do with the crown once he had it. Thomason had already proven it couldn't be passed by Void Messenger. But he knew he had leverage, because he knew she was one of the Sleepless, and he didn't know that she was soulbound. So she tells him that she'll obey, but then does, excuse me, I have to give Andal medicine on the hour. And then asking, do you know how you'll get the package to the head office once I bring it to you? And he just says, they'll tell me. And he's not noticing her feeling this. If he were more with it, I'm sure he would have seen this coming, but he's too distracted right now. So she begins pulling all kinds of things into the syringe. There's just a general sedative. There's something labeled experimental, dangerous. And then she jabs him in the thigh with it. And because one of them is a sedative, he isn't able to speak loudly enough, quickly enough before it begins to overcome him. But he goes down. He stuck out the key, muttering something with a tongue that sounded like it was growing thicker by the second. Ice began to form at his feet, and the room darkened. Jerry's earring flickered green, and she tossed an emerald spark at the key. And she completely burns it up, and Goss is looking at her completely flipped out, realizing what's going on. She grabbed his neck, unleashing just a little of her power into his throat. It didn't take much. Goss tried to scream, but with his throat fused shut, he made little progress. He couldn't even flail his limbs. They had already gone dead. In only a few more seconds, the cocktail of potions completed its work and he collapsed. Not only did she have the syringe to clean up and put back where it was, She had to return a grown man's limp body to his bunk without waking anyone. And in the morning, they see the wound and think that it is a bite, a sting, I guess, really. So this scene is so cold-blooded. And when I got here, I had been kind of understanding where the way that she felt with Andal. But when I combined this with her saying to herself, it will be worth it to Andal, I don't know why, but the two things overlapping, it was like I officially just kind of had too much. Because what happened to Andal wasn't purposeful, I was able to leave that sort of, well, it went the way it went. It wasn't something that she had orchestrated. And I get how you could have mixed feelings. Like, I think all of us have sort of experienced this kind of thing at one time or another, where there is the thing to hope for because it's kind and right. And there's the thing to hope for because it would actually be pretty convenient and beneficial to you in a way that you really don't want to admit, And I get that. But her saying it will be worth it when she has just been thinking about how grossed out she is by her own feelings. I want her to be grossed out and then stay there. I want her to be like, God, what is happening to me? Instead, she immediately tries to justify it. And then she goes on to commit this murder. And there is no reason why his murder should be more upsetting to me than the murder of the captain with the incendiary, whatever they were, the bombs, whatever. Because this guy doesn't mean any more to me than that dude did. But I think it's the fact that on top of everything, she is able to come up with a way to make the death look believable. And in such a short, she just comes up with this on the spur of the moment. This is one of the first times where I feel like I have felt Jerry is genuinely dangerous in a way I haven't given her the respect of thinking before. I know that she has this soulbound vessel that's really potent, and we've seen how she can use it, and it has killed people that I like. However, using a weapon isn't as intimidating to me because that feels almost like a cheat code. This moment where she is trying to keep his mind on her, talking to him in just such a way to sort of throw him off and make him think about things and get distracted so that she can very slowly and methodically fill this syringe. And the way that she has him under the effects of it and is whispering, "It's okay, don't worry about it," as she injects him. It's so cold-blooded and so thought out. She doesn't need a soulbound vessel for this attack. She uses that later when she destroys his throat. But the initial attack that she does would not require this at all. And for me, a person who is this effective without having any powers is way scarier. So, and it coming, like I said, right on the heels of her telling herself, yeah, I'm sickened by my own attitude, but also it ultimately will be fine. That kind of continuing rationalization, despite your conscience being unhappy with what you're doing, now it's too far. I can't have any real sympathy for her anymore. It's too far. And also finding out the whole thing that distracted Andal, even though she didn't orchestrate it, was her just trying to pretend to be helpless. The fact that Andal nearly died for the sake of her acting a part is so again, it's like rude. It's him being a side effect. It's not even like she wanted him killed. If she had wanted him to be, it would gross me out. But it would at least feel like it was under control when it's something that just happened by accident. And it's just because she's trying to be like, oh, I'm not so bouncy. I'm so helpless. Help, Calder. There's a feeling to that of it just she just doesn't, it doesn't matter to her what happens to everybody else. And I know that's not true because she's saying it does matter, but also she's immediately following it up with it doesn't matter because it will be worth it. So just circles and circles and circles. And it just, this scene just, she demonstrates a kind of iciness that I know we have seen, but it never quite felt like this to me. Asher is saying she's a fanatic and it's so awful to watch her return to that fanaticism instead of leaning into her humanity. Yeah, I think maybe that's it, that she has like a moment where it feels as if she may start to see the light and consider maybe they see us as evil because we are, but no, she can't. And I understand how when you work your whole life to like reach a certain goal, how you can't face that you are being bamboozled because now your whole life is a lie. So I do sympathize to a degree with that, but like, get over it, you know? So anyway, I had better wrap up. That is the end of the chapter, but, nope. That's it. Jyrene, fuck Jyrene. I'm glad that Calder kills her eventually. We shall see how that goes. All right. Thank you again so much to everybody who's listening. Thank you to Asher for commissioning this episode. And I will be seeing you guys on Thursday with a new one. Until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.